It's Solitary Nation. My name is Matt Duhamel, your host for this Tuesday's episode. And this is going to be almost like a two-part series. Tonight, we are talking with Heather, who has a husband in prison. He is incarcerated. And Heather, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. I want to just start with this quote. Judy Reeves wrote in 1994, quote, "Families of inmates have been called the hidden victims of crime." Your husband's been incarcerated for how long now?
He's been there for 11 years.
11 years. Do you think that quote is accurate? I mean, do you feel like a hidden victim within the criminal justice system?
I don't know about the term victim, but I think definitely it's an invisible prison sentence that anybody who is supporting somebody in prison serves as well. And sometimes I think that there is a level of exploitation that can lead to victimization, but I really think it's identifiable by anybody who has a family member or friend in prison, sure enough.
Okay. And the quote goes on to say, when a crime is committed, there are victims other than the primary victims. These secondary victims include the families of the primary victim and another often overlooked group of victims, family members of the person who has committed the crime. The families of inmates are often overlooked in research and in designing social programs, yet many suffer devastating consequences as a result of a loved one's incarceration. And so I don't know how it feels. I've never had a wife in prison, or I've had a family member in prison, but not a spouse. I'm sure you get a lot of people, asking you odd questions and just an overall stigma. How do you handle the social stigma of having your husband incarcerated?
I think a lot of it comes from, it's been some time now. We've been together for quite a few years, and I've learned to figure out how to embrace the negativity and turn it into just energy that propels me for the advocacy and putting work into our relationship and things like that. The stigma is definitely something that I feel all the time. I think that it also comes from people that I have close to me that are supporting me, family and friends that keep me going. And then just learning how to adjust how I present myself and also the expectations I have of people as I interact with them. I think that just sort of learning to harness all of the negativity in a way that I can control as much as I can in a situation of which I have little control, I think is really important. And it certainly is something that helps me to stay balanced in my interactions and my own identities.
I think you said a key point there, letting go, not trying to control something that you can't control. You definitely cannot control the America's criminal justice system. I mean, it's going to happen, whatever happens. Is that kind of the key to just learning to let go and try to make it positive, like you mentioned?
I think you have to. I think there's so much negativity that can come out of this, and if you dwell on that and if you focus on that, I think it just kind of eats you alive. I think part of it is that I have to have some kind of control. We do, my husband as well, and us and our relationship. And so handling the social stigma means that I control my story. I control who I tell and how I tell it and when I tell it and what I tell, and it's on my terms. It's not such a big deal for him. He is living that stigma. He is surrounded by that all the time. But me interacting out here, that's a little bit different. And for me to maintain how I tell that and how I show that and who I share it with is important. Not that I'm embarrassed by it. I love my husband and I'm proud of our marriage, but rather it's whether or not I have the energy that day to let somebody say something that's going to be bothersome, or if I have the energy that day to try to correct somebody's misconceptions of how things are, and where I need to put that energy and whether I have it to give and whether I want to give it. Sometimes I need that for myself, my kids, and there's some people who I'm just not going to be able to change their mind. But I'd much prefer to have conversations, and I will readily have conversations with anybody who is respectful, whether or not they agree. If they can be respectful, I'm happy to share information with them, because I think a lot of prison and that stigma that we have is based on people not understanding and realizing what it is that we have going on in our nation and how bad it is, how broken it is.
Do you feel comfortable talking about some of the comments that have been made from other people?
Sure. I think I really don't know that I have felt the stigma the same way that a lot of other people do because of how I insist on managing my relationship and my identity as a prison wife much differently than some other people choose to, and that's their choice. I'm not judging that either way, but I think the other day I got a phone call from the bank, and it's somebody whom I know through the bank fairly well, knows of me personally, and she, well-meaning, called to ask me if there had been something wrong with my account because she had noticed some odd transactions, and they were the transactions for which I send my husband money and put money on the phone account. Mm-hmm. And I didn't respond to her and explain anything either way. Rather, what I did was I just said, I've looked at it and I think everything looks good. Thank you for checking. But it was the assumption for her to think that I wouldn't be doing that I wouldn't be making payments to somebody in prison. That sort of struck me. I appreciated her looking out for me, though. I think
sure.
Stigma comes from when I tried to get our marriage license. I was denied a marriage license, and the county clerk told me specifically those people lose their rights. And she made it to where we could not get one, trying to find lots of loopholes. She said that since he wasn't counted in census, he wasn't a resident of the state, when most definitely he's in that state.
Yes.
But then as a non-resident, the requirement was for non-residents to marry in that county to get that license. We both had to appear, which of course we couldn't do. And so as an elected official, there wasn't really a supervisor I could go to, but I did work my way to the state's attorney. And upon not getting much traction there, I consulted an attorney and let the state's attorney know that I would be taking legal action if I could not get a certificate, our license to marry. And then suddenly he was moved to a different county in which we were able to marry. But the county clerk refused my phone call. She's a public official, and she refused my phone calls and told her staff to do the same, both for myself, the advocacy group I was working with, the minister, just would not allow any conversation to happen, and for nothing other than what she had said. In fact, at one point, she told me that I should have thought of this before I decided to marry somebody in prison. So
oh my goodness.
I think those kind of instances that happen where I realize that these people really think that I'm less than too, let alone that my husband is, I think they're hurtful, but I have to try not to let them get to me.
Have you visited him? But you've visited him, right? Haven't you? A couple times?
Oh, yeah.
Or
yeah, I go whenever I can.
Okay, I figured you did. Give us an idea of a typical visit. What does it look like when you go there and visit your husband? And how are you treated from prison staff and the guards?
Well, I think that I want to be very clear to say that people in prison, the officers that are working, they're trying to do a job, and some of them do it very well. Some of them treat me very respectfully, and I've not had any issues. And it sometimes can vary per facility. Each facility has its own sort of tone to it. Some of them are not as kind and respectful. And so I think that even as we look at the nature of visits, all data points to the fact that having family support during prison and coming out of prison is huge. It correlates directly with being successful, both during that time and afterwards. And so why would there be any kind of hindrance or have it be made to be difficult to visit somebody's family in prison? I cannot fathom. I think that prisons in general kind of sometimes they get a little bit out of control. Like they get used to controlling inmates and controlling that environment. And, perhaps that's rightfully so. I have some different opinions, but at what point does that stop? Because I'm not in prison. And so for the visits that I've gone on, I think it makes it difficult when officers follow a different set of rules. When they look at the policy and read it one way and another one reads it the other way. When I get there and then I'm sent away because the clothes that I wore previously now are not acceptable just because a different staff person is working. But to have an officer tell me, just go up the street and you can buy something at the dollar store, well, for them to assume that I have the money to do that or to not even be aware of the inconvenience of that. And I don't wear anything that isn't appropriate, but it could be the difference of how they think your jeans fit one day or not. But I've worn an outfit one day and come back another time and worn the same thing, and then suddenly it's not all right.
Yeah, and I know it really depends on the level of security in the prison, but there's really limited touching that you can do, hugs. And I mean, it really depends. Like I'd mentioned, depending on what prison you're in and maybe what guard is there that day. But what's that like? I mean, is there a big limitation on affection and between kids and their parents too?
There really is. And I don't have the policy. I won't even try to get it quoted exactly, but I believe it's children over 2 can't be held. They have to sit on their own, something of that nature. But I think it also has to do with just the fact of how he and I can touch. So I can come in, I can give him a hug and a kiss when I arrive, and when I leave, we can hold hands throughout the visit. We can put our arms around each other, and that's it. And so they will call you out if you put your hand on his knee, just casually as you would your husband, not even anything with a sexual nature. Again, I think it's control. I think it's looking at what is that harm and how normal do we want lives to be. And I don't pretend that they don't have plenty of rules, and I won't try to question that. I know that they have to run a facility, keep everybody safe, and I appreciate that. But I just look at, to what end? A lot of these policies that I look at in the way that they do things, I think, well, what are we accomplishing here? So when he's in one facility and it's 12 hours away from me, and they move him somewhere else and now he's 18 hours away from me, why? He didn't get in any trouble. There's not an issue. So to what good was that? To make him further from me and turn my day trip into a 2-day trip? Or when they have policies where I can't visit on a Saturday because they don't have visits, so I sit in a hotel room. But then as you're asking about, touching and intimacy and things that are normal for humans, let alone a married couple, and I'm not, of course, we're not going to sit and make out or anything like that, but just normal touching that humans need, emotional interaction, touching and physical interaction. For what? What does it hurt if my hand is on his neck or his hand is on my knee? I don't get it.
I guess that is due to the fear of drugs coming into the prison. Is that pretty much what they're saying? In terms of lack of intimacy?
Yeah, contraband, but I think also, of course, there's always people who don't follow the rules, and so I will give them that credit. There will be always somebody, these are people who didn't, most of them, follow the rules in the world and society, and so here they are, so that's fair. But I also think that it has to do, if it's contraband that they're concerned with, that's a training issue. That's on their staff to do a thorough job and to do a good job. But I think a lot of it really just has to do with control. And one of the biggest messages I think that it's important for people to understand is that prison is enough. As it is, prison is enough. There's no reason to apply further stigma. There's no reason to apply further controls. For what? Because at the end of the day, he goes back to his cube and I go back to wherever I live and we're not together. And that's enough. And that's enough for any human to be pulled apart from society and not have that interaction that humans need. So at what point do these things become just a matter of control, and for what good?
And you sound Heather, you sound very educated on this and very strong. And so I know you must have some tips on other spouses that are going through this. Any advice for them to maybe reduce the trauma?
Well, I don't know about the word trauma. I try not to put too many negative connotations into my life, into people's interaction with people in prison. I think that there is a lot of detriment. There can be a lot of negative outcomes, and certainly parents who have a child there, it's a different experience than for me, and so I don't want to discount that, but I don't know about using the word trauma. I think as far as easing the experience, I think it's important for people to stay respectful. There are people running the prison are people trying to do their jobs. Now, can it be done better? Perhaps. And do I have some thoughts? They should call me. But outside of that, they're all trying to do the very best that they can. They've got their own jobs and their own families. So I think trying to interact with them respectfully is important, and trying to remain appropriate with them and realize that they're humans too. But I think knowing the policies and the procedures, having an understanding of what my responsibilities are as I go to their facility, what they're looking for from me to do, what rules to follow, and not making their job any harder. But at the same time, I'm familiar with what they can be doing and how they should be doing it, and then how to properly have those respectful conversations, because sometimes it can just be a mix-up, a new person on staff or come from another prison and the rules are a little bit different. So I want to give them the benefit of the doubt until they show me otherwise. I think as far as those of us, particularly wives, that's who I can speak to most easily, I think it is a matter of remembering that I look at my story as my marriage. And so my marriage stands alone. I'm proud of my husband. I'm proud of my marriage. I don't have any complaints right now outside of the obvious. I live the fairy tale every day, and I'm very happy. Of course, I wish he was here. My goodness, of course, I want him here. But that isn't the case right now. He is somebody that is innocent. I think it's important that people realize that innocent people go to prison for lots of reasons. There can be faulty eyewitness testimony. There can be faulty DNA evidence. There can be alibis that are not called, and a well-meaning attorney could decide not to call an alibi, and that could be the pivotal moment, and the jury never knew that it existed. I think that it's really important for people to just keep an open mind, because it happens a lot more than we want to think, and it's unfortunate that it does. We have a wonderful justice system as far as what it tries to do to keep everything fair, and I appreciate that it's far ahead of a lot of other places, but I think that we have a long way to go.
A little more lighthearted subject here. How do you keep the romance alive? You have the phone, you have the in-person visits, you have letters. Maybe give me an example of the fun things that you do and that you create in such a limited environment.
We do as much as we can together. And so we watch sunsets. And it means that he calls me and I tell him about the sunset. And then I take some pictures of the sunset and of me in the sunset, and I send them to him. And so our date may take a couple of days for him to get the pictures. But he has that captured moment of our interaction. We do whatever we can together. We just adjust it. He's a part of our family. I have two sons, 9 and 20, and he is a part of our family. So I have night class, and if my night class overlaps occasionally with bedtime, he'll call. He'll have my son remind him to brush his teeth, read him his story, and put him in bed. So a lot of it is just the normalcy that we make and that we strive to make, that I look for to try to coordinate out here in the world, as we call it, to try to make it normal. So I graduated. I got my master's a few months ago, and so it was tricky, but we coordinated the phone calls. And so when I went up and they called my name and I walked across the stage, I had the announcer say my name into my phone, and he was on the phone with me and he walked across the stage with me.
Oh, wow.
And so we just do what we can to make it normal and to keep it real. And I'm grateful for that. And that's a privilege that we have, because honestly, those phone calls are expensive. And for us to line up phone calls means that, maybe he stays on the phone for a half an hour to wait for that moment, because it's so rare that he's going to hit the second my name gets called. Those are expensive dates. But those are the little things we do to just kind of keep things going.
You mentioned earlier advocacy. And I mentioned that you are very educated, because you're living this with a husband in prison. And, I don't know if you like the term prison wife, but I think most people use that term in this situation. What type of advocacy are you involved in right now?
I am okay with the term prison wife. Everybody has their own sort of preferences, I suppose. I have a lot of identities, and being a prison wife is one of those, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of my husband in prison. I'm proud of what it takes for us to have this relationship. I'm proud of the strength within me that I have developed and that I have found, and so I'm okay with that term. As a prison wife, and as part of my other identities, of course, I work. I am also a student, almost a full-time student, grad student. I'm earning my PhD in education. I am a mother, for all intents and purposes, a single mother, and I'm also a wife to a man in prison. So among those different identities, I think it's important for me to advocate and to educate people as much as I can. And a lot of that, honestly, is self-serving. I want to make it easier for me. I want to make it easier for my kids, but I also want it to be okay for my husband when he's out. He's going to have to reenter into a society that is not, by and large, a forgiving one. And I want to make sure that I've done what I can to try to help people understand differently. And I think that it's important for all of my sister prison wives that are going through this, and families and parents, that everybody just start to understand that we need a different level of compassion and empathy. So the advocacy work I do can be as simple as talking to somebody who's willing to listen, and I'll tell anybody about how much I love my husband and how proud of him and us I am, but also looking at the inaccuracies that they might be working with. I'm also working on two pretty good projects right now. One of them is the Million for Prisoners Human Rights March that's coming up in Washington, D.C. on August 19th. And I think it's going to be a phenomenal inaugural event where people are coming together to talk about the 13th Amendment. For a lot of people, they don't realize that slavery in the United States is still absolutely legal. And as the 13th Amendment is written, people who have been convicted of a crime can actually be charged with free work, producing things or labor in prisons. And that is something that continues, and so many people don't realize it. And I think that's an important clause to take out of our Constitution, but it's also a mind shift we need to make in general about prison. I also am involved in the International Prisoners Family Conference. It's an annual conference that happens in Dallas, but throughout the year, they advocate for families. And I think that it's a unique part of this role that I have. It's one time out of the year where I can go and be 100% a prison wife, and it is okay. I am embraced. I am welcome. I don't feel different. I don't have to change up my identities. I don't have to hide when he calls and try to answer around the recording so it doesn't seem awkward when I'm in front of somebody and don't say hello for 30 seconds. It's something where I feel completely normal, and it's a bunch of like-minded people getting together to just look at reform and support and advocacy and change. So those are my biggest advocacy groups right now, but I'll get on board with anything I can that'll help make a difference, like this project, Matt. Thank you very much for allowing me to do that.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I couldn't do it without guests and people coming on the show, and I appreciate you being, willing to tell your story. I am going to put the links to those two projects that you'd mentioned. So if you're listening, if you go to Solitary Nation podcast and to this episode, which is season 2, episode 7, you'll see links. And if you want to get involved or if you just need support, those links will be there. You'd mentioned, and just a couple more questions here. You mentioned this. This goes back to a little bit of the stigma. I think, and tell me if I'm wrong. Some people will think, well, man, that husband or that spouse, they're in prison, so there must be something wrong with the wife. There must be something wrong with the husband. But from what I'm hearing is you're just like anybody else. You've got a career, you've got education.
I think that it definitely is something that I'm aware of. I am a woman. I identify as a woman. I identify as a white woman. I have privilege, and my privilege often negates my lack of privilege in other areas. And I think that's the same for anybody. Whatever social capital you're working with kind of balances out plus or minus. So the fact that I don't present like people think a prison wife does, that stereotype of she must have low self-esteem, he must be taking advantage of her, she maybe couldn't find anybody else, she should have tried harder, et cetera, the negative connotations, when I don't present that way to people, I think that they hear me differently. And I feel like I need to use that for good, because anybody who chooses to live this lifestyle, anybody that is supporting their child, their father, their mother, their friend in prison, is somebody who's putting themselves out there and being vulnerable on any level. Some level, they're opening themselves up. And I think it's important to realize that this is hard. This is difficult to do. And rather than to judge those people or to think negatively of them, but to rather look at their strengths and what society needs to do as we keep building up our mass incarceration problem and we keep looking at the prison industrial complex, we're going to have that collateral damage that ripples through our society, kids and everybody else. So rather than stigmatizing and stereotyping and assuming that there's something wrong, look at all of these fine qualities, the dedication, the resiliency that comes of supporting somebody in prison and a relationship at that, I think is important.
Definitely. Good advice again. Wonderful, wonderful stuff on this episode. We are running out of time. Anything else that you want to add before we close the show?
I think it's just really important to be careful how we judge other people for any reason. The justice system sets up those who are incarcerated, who are wrapped up in its arms, or rather ensnarled probably is a better term, but also those that are affiliated with. And I think that we need to look at how we can do this better and what cost we are, not only fiscal dollars, but also just the lives of those who are affiliated, their kids. My goodness, the impact on kids. It's important to not just look at this as woe is me or poor her or, it's got to just suck so bad or anything like that, because I live a very fulfilled life. The fact that he's in prison, it does suck, but I have the fairy tale. I'm very happy. I have a unique kind of loneliness that consists of me desperately missing my husband and yet being completely fulfilled with the fact that we are married. And so I think it's important to really look at how this can be made a positive situation, how each person can look at however they're affiliated with the justice system and recognize that it is unfortunate, but then how can it be harnessed in a way that it can be good?
Okay. And I did mention at the top of the show that this was part 1 of 2, and we are going to try to have an interview, a discussion with your husband from prison. And we hope to do that in the next, probably within the next couple of weeks. Do you think that would be possible?
I think it would be excellent. I think even though I am a marginalized population as a prison wife, I'm known. If you say the word prison wife, people know what that means. But I don't know that we've ever really looked at what it's like for him. And it's just as difficult for him, but my goodness, he's got prison on top of it. And I think that is something that's an important point of view.
Thank you, Heather. This is Matt Duhamel for Solitary Nation Podcast. If you want to be a guest on the show, contact me at host@solitarynationpodcast.com. And don't forget to like our Facebook page and our Twitter page and all the other social media that we're on. I'll talk to you next week on Solitary Nation.